The morning sun had barely crept through the curtain, but the Mwangi house was already alive with chaos. Kian zipped up his small backpack, double-checking that his laptop and notes were tucked safely inside. Today was the day he would leave for Cape Town, a tech competition he had been dreaming about for months. His heart raced with excitement, but the tension in the room grounded him. His father appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You're chasing fantasy again. Real men work, not dream," he said, voice dripping with disdain. Kian swallowed the lump in his throat. He knew this wasn't just about words. It was about years of judgment and disappointment. "I'll prove you wrong one day," he said softly, almost a whisper, but firm enough to carry his resolve. His father's anger snapped. He grabbed his old laptop and hurled it across the floor. The screen cracked with a loud pop, sparks of glass glittering like a broken promise. Kian felt the sting in his chest, but he didn't look back. He just picked up his backpack and walked toward the door, the morning light brushing against his face like a small encouragement. Before leaving, he bent down and whispered to his mother, who watched silently from the kitchen, her eyes wet. "Next time I come home, I'll make you proud." Her hand reached for his shoulder, squeezing it gently, a quiet promise between them. Kian stepped outside, leaving the shattered laptop and bitter words behind, carrying only hope, determination, and a dream too big to ignore. Kian shuffled through the crowded airport, dragging his small backpack behind him. His excitement from the morning had started to fade, replaced by a dull unease. He had barely settled into the waiting area when his phone buzzed. He picked it up, heart skipping a beat, and read the message. Flight canceled due to storm. A sinking feeling took over him. Cape Town was just hours away, and now the storm had thrown all his plans into chaos. He immediately typed a message to his father, hoping for a bit of guidance, maybe even a ride or some money to get through the mess. Minutes later, the reply came. He opened it with trembling hand. "Good luck walking home, loser." The words stung worse than the cold airport air. Kian's fingers hovered over the phone for a moment before he set it down. Numbness spread through him, a mix of shock, anger, and disappointment. He looked around at the bustling travelers, families laughing, business people checking phones, and he felt completely alone. With no money, no plan, and nowhere to go, Kian sank onto a hard bench. His backpack leaned against him, and his cracked laptop flickered weakly on the floor. It was damaged from the chaos at home, but it was still alive. Somehow, that small device became his anchor. He opened it, staring at the familiar screen, the keyboard worn but willing. Hours passed as the storm raged outside. Kian's fingers moved over the keys, lines of code forming shapes and patterns in the dim glow of the terminal lights. Each click, each command, felt like a tiny rebellion against the world that seemed determined to push him down. He was exhausted, cold, and hungry, but something inside him sparked. By midnight, he had begun the first version of an app, a system that could predict flight delays using real-time data. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was alive, growing under his fingertips. The airport, the storm, and even his father's harsh words faded around him. All that mattered was the rhythm of the code and the small, stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, this night could turn everything around. When he finally leaned back, rubbing his sore eyes, Kian looked at the flickering screen and whispered to himself, "If no one believes in me, I'll believe in me." And with that, he dove back into the code, letting the storm outside fuel the fire inside. Kian sat hunched in a quiet corner of the airport terminal, the hum of the fluorescent lights above blending with the occasional announcements over the loudspeaker. His backpack was open beside him, and his cracked laptop glowed faintly, casting shadows across his tired face. After hours of coding, typing, testing, and fixing, the prototype of his app finally came together. It was a system that could predict flight delays using real-time data. It wasn't perfect yet, but it worked. He was on a call with Tasha, a friend he'd met online who shared his passion for tech. He explained the app's features, how it pulled data from multiple sources, and how it could save travelers hours of wasted time. His voice grew animated, forgetting the cold airport floor and the fatigue in his muscles. For the first time that night, he felt alive, like the storm outside couldn't touch him. A deep voice broke through his explanation. "You built that alone?" Kian froze and looked up. A man in a crisp suit, his posture confident, was standing just a few feet away. He had an attentive gaze and an air of someone used to serious business. "Yes," Kian said quietly, nodding. He wasn't used to strangers showing interest, especially not someone who looked like they dealt with millions of dollars every day. The man smiled, a mix of amusement and curiosity. "I'm Blake. How would you like to pitch this in front of real investors tomorrow?" Kian blinked. His stomach jumped, his heart hammering like a drum. The words sounded surreal, almost too good to be true. Investors. Tomorrow. A chance to show the world what he had created. He hadn't imagined an opportunity like this would come to him in a crowded, storm-stricken airport at midnight. He glanced at Tasha, who gave him an encouraging nod. Kian's mind raced, thinking of the long nights of coding, the cracked laptop, the storm, the rejection, and the loneliness. All of it had led to this moment. Really? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Blake smirked again, leaning slightly closer. Really? You've got talent, kid. Don't waste it sitting on a bench. Tomorrow, you show them what you can do. For the first time since the flight was canceled, hope flickered in Kian's chest. It was a fragile spark, but it was enough to keep him awake, enough to keep him working through the night. He returned to his laptop, fingers flying over the keys, preparing, tweaking, perfecting. The storm outside raged on, but inside that small corner of the terminal, a new fire had started. Kian whispered to himself, almost laughing, "Maybe this is my chance." And for the first time in days, the airport didn't feel like the end of the world. It felt like the beginning of something bigger. Kian stood outside the conference hall, tugging at the sleeves of a clean shirt borrowed from a janitor. His own clothes were wrinkled and worn from days of travel, coding, and waiting in airports. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the nerves twisting in his stomach. This was it, the chance Blake had promised. Investors, opportunities, his future. But standing here, everything felt bigger than he had imagined, and for a moment, he wondered if he could really do it. Inside, the room buzzed with chatter and the hum of projector. Kian set up his cracked laptop on the podium, its screen flickering slightly. He clicked through slides, his fingers shaking, trying to steady his voice as he began explaining the app. The system he had built could predict flight delays better than anything else on the market. He described how it worked, how it analyzed real-time data, and how it could save travelers time, money, and frustration. Then disaster struck. The lights flickered and the laptop froze. A ripple of laughter spread through the audience. Kian's heart sank, and he felt every eye in the room on him. Sweat prickled his forehead, and he struggled to think fast. From the corner of the room, Blake stood and raised his hand, cutting through the snickering. "Everyone wait," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "This kid's code just outperformed our current AI system, on a broken laptop." The room fell silent. Eyes widened, jaws dropped. Whispers turned into stunned gasps. Kian stared at Blake, unsure if he was dreaming. Slowly, the tension lifted, and applause began to ripple through the hall. The crowd wasn't laughing anymore. They were cheering. Kian's fingers shook as he resumed the demo, showing the results, the data, the potential. The audience leaned in, captivated. He realized in that moment that all the hard nights, all the storms, and all the rejection had led to this exact second. After he finished, Blake stepped forward and smiled. "You've got talent, Kian. I'd like to invest right now." Kian blinked. His chest tightened, a mix of disbelief and relief. The small, scared boy who had sat on a cold airport bench coding into the night had just been offered the chance to turn his dream into a real company. He nodded, voice barely steady but full of determination. "Thank you," he said. "I won't let you down." As the applause continued, Kian realized something. This wasn't just a presentation. It was a turning point. The cracked laptop, the borrowed shirt, the long nights, they hadn't broken him. They had made him stronger, ready for the chance he had worked so hard to earn. Kian sat back in his chair, staring at the signed contract in front of him. His hands were still shaking, but this time from excitement, not nerves. He had just closed his first deal, $100,000 for his app. Every long night at the airport, every cracked laptop and lonely dinner, every harsh word from home had led to this moment. It was real. His idea had value. He had value. He picked up his phone and typed a message to his father, fingers hovering for a moment before he pressed send. Flight canceled, but future confirmed. He stared at the screen, waiting. Moments passed. Nothing. No reply. His father had left him on scene. A part of him wanted to feel angry or hurt, but instead, Kian just smiled. He realized something important. His worth didn't need anyone's approval, not even his father's. That evening, he opened a notebook and scribbled down the name he had been carrying in his mind for weeks. Skypath AI. It felt right. It captured the journey he had taken, the turbulence, the obstacles, and the flight he had built for himself. The days and months that followed were a blur of meetings, coding, refining the app, and pitching to more investors. Every new challenge, every skeptical face fueled him. He remembered the airport bench, the storm, the cracked laptop, and he promised himself he would never forget where he started. Within 2 years, Skypath AI had grown beyond what Kian had dared to dream. Offices opened in Nairobi, Johannesburg, Lagos, and Accra. Airlines and travel agencies began using the app, praising its accuracy and innovation. The company's valuation hit $100 million. People started recognizing his name, asking for interviews, and celebrating his success. Kian never let the recognition get to his head. He remembered the nights of doubt, the cold airport floors, and the message he had sent his father. That simple act of writing down a future he believed in had started it all. He had created something bigger than himself, a company that didn't just predict flights, but symbolized hope, persistence, and resilience. And every time someone asked about his inspiration, he smiled quietly, thinking about that small, scared boy in the airport. He didn't need anyone to believe in him back then. He had done it on his own. And now, Skypath AI was proof that a canceled flight could turn into a future worth chasing. Kian stepped off the plane at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, the warm Nairobi air brushing against his face. It had been years since he last set foot in the city, and everything felt familiar and strange all at once. But this time, he wasn't coming home to reconcile or seek approval. He was here for the Tech Expo, where he would be the keynote speaker. His heart beat fast, but this time it was excitement, not fear. Across town, his father sat on a worn couch, flipping through channels. When the expo appeared on TV, his eyes widened. The young man he had called a loser, years ago, now stood confidently on stage, poised and polished. Every word, every gesture radiated success. For the first time, his father didn't know what to say. Back at the expo, reporters swarmed Kian as soon as he stepped off the stage. Cameras flashed, microphones pushed toward him, and people jostled to hear every word. He smiled politely, signing a few autographs, but remained focused. One reporter finally asked, "What inspired you to reach this point?" Kian paused, letting the question hang in the air. He thought about the cracked laptop, the long nights in the airport, the storms he had faced, and the words that once crushed him. Then he smiled, the kind of smile that came from someone who had fought, struggled, and finally won. "Being told I'd never make it," he said simply. The audience erupted in cheers. Phones flashed, cameras clicked, and people leaned in to catch every word. It wasn't just applause for an app or a business. It was applause for resilience, determination, and proof that failure wasn't permanent. Kian's story resonated with everyone in the room, a reminder that being underestimated could become the fuel to succeed. As the crowd settled, Kian took a moment to look around the expo hall. Sponsors, investors, and young tech enthusiasts moved through the space, many stopping to ask about Skypath AI. Kian answered questions patiently, sharing insights, but never forgetting the journey that had brought him here. Every struggle, every moment of doubt, had shaped him into the person he had become. Later that night, he stood by the window of his hotel room, looking out at the city lights of Nairobi. He thought about his father watching on TV, stunned and silent, and he felt a quiet sense of triumph, not revenge, just validation. Not for him, but for the boy who had been told he'd never make it. This was his return, not as the boy they called a loser, but as someone who had built his own path, soared on his own terms, and returned to show that success didn't need permission. That evening, just as Kian was about to review some plans for Skypath AI, there was a knock on his hotel room door. He frowned. Visitors weren't expected. When he opened it, he froze. Standing there were his parents. His father's chest puffed up like he was trying to appear proud, but Kian could see the tension and worry hidden underneath. His mother clutched her handbag, looking unsure, her eyes wide and glossy. "Son," his father began, voice a little too loud, trying to mask embarrassment, "I always knew you'd do well." Kian studied him for a long moment. The words sounded hollow, rehearsed. The man who had called him a loser and thrown a laptop across the floor was now pretending to see him as successful. He stepped aside, letting them in, and spoke quietly. "No," he said slowly, each word measured. "You knew I'd walk home. You just didn't know I'd build one bigger than yours." The room went silent. His father's confident posture faltered, and he looked away. Kian could feel years of anger, disappointment, and distance fill the air, thick and suffocating. His mother's eyes welled up. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "We missed you," she said, trembling. Kian's chest tightened. He opened his arms and hugged her gently. It was tender, protective, the way he would hold someone who needed comfort. She clung to him, sobbing quietly. But when he let go, his gaze didn't shift to his father. There was no forgiveness offered, no warmth. That bridge would take longer to rebuild, if it ever could. His father stood awkwardly in the corner, unsure how to react. Kian turned back to his laptop, ignoring the tension, focusing on the future he had fought so hard to create. He realized that some wounds couldn't be healed with words or gestures. They needed time, actions, and patience. The night grew quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside the hotel window. Kian's mother lingered a moment longer, reaching out to touch his arm before leaving. He let her go, letting her grief and love exist without letting it weaken his resolve. As the door closed behind them, Kian sat back down, the hotel room quiet again. He allowed himself a small, private smile, thinking not about anger or revenge, but about how far he had come. He had built something real, something lasting. And sometimes that was the only answer a loser needed to prove himself. Weeks later, Kian was in his office, reviewing some expansion plans for Skypath AI, when the receptionist buzzed through. A man wanted to see him immediately. Kian frowned, and when he opened the door, he froze. It was his father, but this wasn't the confident, mocking man from years ago. His suit was wrinkled, shoes scuffed, and there was a worried tension in his eyes. The construction business had collapsed under debt, and now he was standing here, humbled. "Son," his father began, voice tight with desperation. I need help. Just help your father." Kian studied him carefully, taking in the posture, the pleading tone, the years of pride now crumbling. There was no anger in him, only calm clarity. Slowly, he reached across his polished desk and slid a piece of paper toward his father. His father looked down at it, confused. Kian waited, his expression steady. On the paper was an employment offer, detailed, professional, practical. "You can work under our logistics department," Kian said evenly. "Salary's fair. Hours reasonable. You'll be contributing, and you'll learn a lot." The father's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. He stared at Kian as if trying to process what had just happened. The old pride, the old hierarchy of father and son, seemed to hang in the air, heavy and fragile. "You once said I needed real work," Kian added softly, his voice carrying both memory and subtle satisfaction. "I'm offering you some." Silence filled the office. The man who had once dismissed his son's dreams now realized what Kian had built. Not just a successful business, but a world where roles had shifted, where respect was earned, and where humility mattered. Finally, his father nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly, taking the paper. It wasn't pride that softened him. It was understanding, a new respect for the son he had once underestimated. Kian watched him carefully, offering no smile, no judgment. This wasn't about revenge. It was about lessons learned, about giving someone the chance to rebuild themselves the right way. The day ended quietly. His father left, head slightly bowed, the weight of recognition settling over him. Kian returned to his desk, focused, calm, and resolute. Skypath AI was growing, expanding across Africa, but more importantly, Kian had set a boundary, a line between past pain and future opportunity. Sometimes he thought the most powerful thing wasn't money or success or revenge. It was offering someone a chance to rise again on your terms. And today, he had done exactly that. Kian's father walked into the Skypath AI warehouse for the first time, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped the mop. He had never imagined himself here, cleaning floors and organizing storage racks for the company his son had built. Pride and stubbornness still lingered in his posture, but the desperation of losing his construction business had pushed him into unfamiliar territory. Co-workers stopped what they were doing when they saw him, whispering under their breaths. "Is that the boss's father?" one asked. "Wow," another muttered, unable to hide a mix of shock and curiosity. He felt their stares and the quiet judgment, but he kept moving, sweeping floors, organizing supplies, and learning how things really worked at a company. Days turned into weeks. At first, the work was humiliating. His hands, once used to wielding tools for construction projects, were now rough from scrubbing floors and moving boxes. But slowly, the routine began to teach him something he had never understood: humility. He realized that leadership wasn't just about giving orders, money, or authority. It was about understanding every part of the system, respecting those who did the work, and learning from those who had built something better than he ever had. One evening, after finishing his shift, he paused outside the office building. The sun was setting, painting the city in shades of orange and gold. His gaze lifted to the top of the building where Kian's name, Skypath AI, was displayed in bold letters. He whispered to himself, almost as if confessing a truth he had denied for years. "You were never a loser." Kian, standing a few steps away, watched silently from behind the glass doors. He felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. There was no need for confrontation, no need for verbal forgiveness. Seeing his father finally understand and accept his own past mistakes was enough. Forgiveness didn't need words. It lived quietly, in patience, in distance, and in the choice to let the moment exist without interference. From that night on, the father continued his work in the warehouse. He no longer tried to reclaim authority or prove anything. Instead, he learned from employees younger and older than him, taking notes, observing processes, and slowly rebuilding his sense of self-worth through effort, not pride. And every time he looked at the building with his son's name on it, he felt both awe and humility, realizing that the boy he had doubted had become a man who had flown higher than he ever imagined. The lessons were hard, the journey uncomfortable, but the understanding that came from it was real. Sometimes, life doesn't hand respect or recognition, you earn it. And in that quiet acceptance, father and son both found a new way to coexist, without words, without fanfare, just silent acknowledgement of what had been and what had grown. Kian stood at the airport window, the morning sun cutting through the clouds and reflecting off the polished tarmac. Planes roared down the runway, lifting into the sky with effortless grace. He watched them take off, feeling a quiet satisfaction deep in his chest. Each ascent reminded him of every setback, every lonely night, every word that tried to hold him down. He thought back to that first flight that never took off, the storm, the cracked laptop, the messages that left him alone. They had left him at the terminal, thinking he'd never fly. But he had discovered something stronger than wings: purpose. He had built his reason, and it had carried him farther than anyone had expected. "They left me at the terminal, thinking I'd never fly," he whispered, voice barely audible over the hum of the airport. "But I didn't need wings, I just needed a reason." The boy they called Loser built the runway they're standing on now. His eyes followed a plane disappearing into the clouds, feeling the weight of his journey in that single moment. Every struggle, every sleepless night, every small victory had led here. The boy who had been underestimated, ignored, and dismissed had created something real, something tangible, something that would last. The camera pans out, revealing a massive airport billboard. Bold letters gleam in the sunlight. Skypath AI, founded by Kian Mwangi. Kian's reflection in the glass shows a calm, determined face. A man who had turned rejection into opportunity, doubt into determination, and failure into a launch pad. He steps back from the window, not boastful, just quiet and proud, knowing that the runway he built was not just for planes, but for every dream he refused to abandon. This was his story, his victory, and his silent message to the world. Resilience can create its own path, even when no one believes in you.